Okay, so I hope you guys are ready to pick up and keep talking about the plant structure and different components of plants. Again, focusing on primarily the flowering plants, the vascular plants here. So we left off last time with looking at the tissue called ground tissue, and then the three different types of, let's call them subcategories of ground tissue. And we were talking about the cell wall of plants, how it's composed of cellulose and lignin, giving it strength and durability, kind of that rigidity provided by the cell wall. But we want to connect it back to previous stuff we've studied. When that plant dies, let's say it's an herbaceous plant that dies in the fall, it has to get decomposed and broken down. Well, that's where the fungi come into the picture. They help break down cellulose and lignin because of the enzymes that fungus can secrete. So start making these connections is what I'm encouraging. So our second group of tissues to discuss is the vascular tissue. So if you guys got that piece of plant from outside, whether it's a leaf or a blade of grass or a twig, look at the cross section. In that cross section, you will have vascular tissue, no matter which part of the plant you pull it from, provided it's a vascular plant, there will be vascular tissue. This is the tissue that the parallel in our body is the blood vessels, arteries and veins. Vascular tissue comes in two types. We call it xylem and phloem. That's the equivalent of the arteries and the veins of the plant. So the leaf contains it, the stem contains vascular tissue, the root system contains vascular tissue. Again, each of these parts of the plant contain ground tissue, vascular, and dermal. But for now, let's take a look at vascular tissue. The two categories of vascular tissue we're going to talk about are going to be xylem and phloem. Now, xylem is going to be a vascular tissue. Let me get this moved over. That is primarily responsible for moving fluids. So the xylem is mostly going to conduct water and dissolved nutrients. Okay, so it's going to conduct these two substances. So I want you to think in a plant, in the plant world or the plant body, which direction would xylem primarily be flowing? Roots up to the shoots, or from the leaves and the shoots down to the roots? Which direction do you guys want to bet on? Write it down. Did you write it down? Okay. So xylem primarily conducts water and dissolved nutrients. Let me move this over. From the roots to the stems and the leaves. So it primarily conducts this fluid up. Water enters the plant in the root system through osmosis, gets into the vascular tissue, and then is transported up to the top of the plant, up to the stems and the leaves through what we'll call capillary action. Now let's do a little drawing here. Let's mentally think about this. All right, so here's your root system. Lots of little tiny hair-like fibers. Maybe it's a big giant taproot, whatever. Here's the trunk of the plant. Here's the branch. And then you have your leaf up here. Is it a microphyll, megaphyll? What kind of leaf structure do we have, etc.? All right, so water is going to enter into, oh, I've got to get a better marker than that, into the plant root system down here through osmosis. Now, once water's into the root system, there's no pump, there's no heart beating to push it around. Instead, Water connects to water. Remember the bonding of water? Hydrogen bonding, sticking one water molecule to another. So what you literally have is a little chain of water molecules here connecting to each other because of the hydrogen bonds. Water is cohesive. It is adhesive. So it allows water to be connected in this big long chain. Now at the very top of the plant, water is going to evaporate out. This is known as, oh, I got to type this. I can't do it this way. It is known as evapotranspiration. Oh. Okay, so that is the process of water evaporating out of the plant leaf. It's hot, it's humid, water leaves, it evaporates out. Now, as the water is evaporating out, because all these little water molecules are attached to each other, they pull. They pull on the ones that are behind them. And what you literally have is this chain of water molecules constantly getting pulled upward through evapotranspiration. So if you had that plant and you cut it right here, some of that water might start leaking out. Especially if you cut a pine tree or something, the sap oozes out of that wound. If an insect or a bird or somebody makes a hole in the tree, that sap, that fluid can ooze out because of the properties of water here. Okay, so that is what the xylem is going to be doing for the plants, from roots to shoots up to the stem and the leaves. Now, as it moves up, there we go. That was better. Okay, as it moves up, the fluid often goes through these specialized little cells called vessel members or tracheids. So what these guys are, they're just specialized cells that have these little pits in them. And the goal here is as water is flowing up and minerals and nutrients, they go up through those pits and it helps prevent backflow. So think about your body. Blood goes from your toes up to your heart through the venous system, the veins. What prevents it from flowing back to your toes in that same vein? Little flaps called valves. So that's the concept I want you to think of here. The vessel members, the tracheids, these are structures that help, once water is moved up through them, help try to prevent some of that backflow of the water, because gravity is saying, hey, go down. But evapotranspiration is saying, no, go up. So they work together. Tracheids tend to be more common in pines, conifers, pine trees, and vessel members, these guys more common in your flowering plants. So depending upon, I was supposed to say flowering, depending upon what you cut your leaf or your stem or your little piece of plant from, you may or may not see tracheids, vessel members. So, all right, so how do we use this? Well, let's think about maple syrup time. When we are tapping maple syrup, find a maple tree, you tap that in the springtime. And in the spring, all the fluid is starting to move up into the plant. So that's why there's still snow on the ground. This is usually in February or March when plants, the maple trees come out of their dormancy period. The flow of fluid is going up and it's moving up. And then eventually it'll reach all the little twigs, the stems, the leaves will start to bud out, and all the plant structures get filled with fluid. Well, we drill a hole in the tree and basically just redirect some of that fluid into these little collection containers. This is the fancy setup. You can do it much simpler with a milk jug and a piece of plastic tubing. So, all right. So, harvest maple syrup in the springtime. The syrup is primarily water with the nutrients in it. You then boil it down to reduce the water content to thicken it up into true maple syrup. So I want you guys to go to your cabinet, pause the video, go look. Do you have maple syrup in your cabinet? Look at the ingredient list. If it's Mrs. Butterworth, she's lying to you. She is not maple syrup. She is sugar water with flavoring added to it. Real maple syrup is a whole different world than Mrs. Butterworth. And I'd encourage you guys, try them both. Eat pancakes or waffles with Mrs. Butterworth, see how you feel. Usually we just like, oh, I feel like I'm going into a sugar coma and I'm going to fall asleep. It's because you've consumed hundreds of calories of glucose and fructose corn syrup with Mrs. Butterworth. Next time, try it with real maple syrup. Hardly any calories in it because it's real maple. It's coming from a maple tree. So if you guys have a maple tree in front of your house or somewhere where you can get to them, look into harvesting syrup. If you don't have those resources, Lincoln Memorial Gardens every spring harvests maple syrup. Check it out. It's a great experience. I encourage you guys see what's going on. But usually February or March is roughly the window when this is happening. And as climate change is happening, these trees are actually doing this earlier every year than they used to because spring is happening earlier, the winters are not getting as cold, so it's really kind of messing stuff up. So that is the xylem that we find as a vascular tissue. The other type of vascular tissue is known as phloem. So phloem is going to be a vascular tissue that plants use to conduct food materials. Food materials. Let me stretch this out so we can see it better. And this will transport from the shoots to the roots. Basically, it's going down. Oh, down. All right, so that is the general idea behind the phloem. It's a reversal. So up in that leaf, photosynthesis is happening, and the plant is producing sugars, as part of photosynthesis. So there's your leaf. And there's our branch, connects into the trunk. Here's the root system. So sugars are being produced. Let's make sugar, look at that color. So sugars are being produced as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Well, that gets kind of drained down throughout the plant structure, throughout the leaves and the stems and the branches. In the fall and winter, all that is draining downward into the root system. Oxygen just diffuses out of the leaf. But the sugars can get drained down into the phloem, conducted downward, stored in the root system during dormancy. Now, in the case of something like a potato, the sugars drain down into the root, makes the potato stored sugar, stores it in the form of starch. In the case of an apple tree, like, oh, I have an apple tree here. Well, a lot of those stored sugars get put into the apple, or the peach, or the pear, or etc. But phloem tends to move downward. Now, as phloem is draining down, the supporting structure for phloem are things called sieve tube members. These are the specialized cells that focus on moving phloem. Again, it's generally, we think about phloem, go back to blue here, moving in a downward direction. The sieve tube members have these things called sieve plates, which act as little filters to trap and retain larger molecules, and then smaller molecules will just diffuse through the little holes or pores within the plates there. So big picture, this is what actual sieve plates look like within Phloem. They're just like little tubes that have filters on them to help filter out and, in a sense, trap and retain some of those nutrients and the sugars being produced, trap them in different locations. All right, so that takes care of our vascular tissue. We're going to pause it here, take a quick break, and then we're going to go check out the last group called the dermal tissue. If you have not gotten a piece of a plant that has bark on it, go collect one. Go grab a little sample of a twig that has some bark on it. We'll need that for the last part here.